You're listening to You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast. For this Encore episode, we feature Paving a Way Disabled in STEM, originally released in July of 2023. Hey, I'm Keith, and thanks for joining me for another Encore episode of You First. As mentioned in the previous two episodes, we're taking a little break from making new episodes. So we decided in the meantime to reshare some past ones that we feel are worth another listen, or maybe you just missed one or more of these, and here's your chance to listen for the first time. This is the third of four Encore episodes. This one initially released in July of 2023, and it's called Paving a Way Disabled in STEM. Maddie and I interviewed Dr. Anita Marshall to learn more about her work to make STEM education more accessible for students with disabilities. Anita created GeoSPACE, the first ever disability accessible planetary geoscience field course and mentoring program. She is also the executive director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity. And we also debunk some myths about academia and honestly wish we were back in school to be part of this really cool work Anita is doing. We were laughing like we were school kids. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed recording it.
You're listening to You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast. In this episode, we chat with Dr. Anita Marshall about disability inclusion in STEM and her accessible field course. Hello, everyone. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Keith, and we're the hosts of You First. Today, we have such a great episode for you. Maddie and I had so much fun recording this. We talk with guest Dr. Anita Marshall about her program, GeoSPACE. So GeoSPACE's mission is to create an accessible planetary geoscience field course and mentoring program to increase the success of students from traditionally marginalized and underserved identities, especially students with disabilities, in transitioning from undergraduate to graduate programs and into careers in the geosciences.
Yeah, it was such a cool interview. And Anita herself identifies as disabled and talks about her experience in STEM, in college and pursuing higher education, and how that really drastically changed for her when she was in a near fatal car accident around the time that she was in college. And she then realized how ableist and inaccessible higher education really is, both experiencing it right before her accident as a non-disabled student and then becoming disabled from that accident and attending school after. So she really wanted to change that experience for other students.
Yeah, it's such a unique perspective she has. So she's also the executive director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, which works to make the geosciences more accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities all around the world. Her work is just really exciting and it's really important. And we were just very pleased to give her space to it here on the podcast.
Yeah, and listen, for people that are about to check out saying like, oh, I don't like STEM or oh, I don't like geology. Right. I have never been a STEM person, but after hearing this program, I was like, honestly, we were both like, I want to go.
Yeah,
like,
it sounds like
suddenly I love science. Like, so it really was such a cool interview, and she's doing such good work. And I think no matter what field you're in or find interesting, there's going to be something you can take away and apply to your own life from this conversation.
Yeah, without a doubt. So let's get to it. Here's our interview with Anita. Hi, Anita. Thanks so much for being our guest today. Let's just start off. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what brought you to this point.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Anita Marshall. I am a lecturer at the University of Florida in the Department of Geosciences. My pronouns are she, her. And I am a very fair-skinned woman with long, dark blonde hair. And I'm wearing my IAGD shirt today, representing the International Association for Geoscience Diversity with our little wheelie guy with his caving headlamp on, noting geologists with disabilities in the geosciences. So I'm really happy to be here and really happy to chat.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Keith and I looked into your work before chatting with you and really excited to learn more about how you came to be within this space and kind of pave your own lane in geosciences. So, could you tell us a bit about how you've created your own space in geosciences? Maybe share a story for those who don't know your work for folks with disabilities within STEM and within geosciences, and what made you realize that you needed to create a space that better centered the needs of folks with disabilities.
Sure. So I started out my geoscience career with no disabilities, and the one of the big selling points of the geosciences for undergrad students is often the adventure angle of going out into the wilderness and doing really cool field studies in the middle of nowhere and hiking up mountains and doing all these like physically challenging and adventurous things, which I was very into as an undergrad. When I continued to graduate school, when I was about to finish my master's degree, I was in a really serious car accident and I almost died a couple times. And
Wow.
um I had major reconstructive surgery. I spent a year in a wheelchair. In fact, I continued to have surgery and rehab up until 2 years ago. I had my seventh reconstructive surgery
Wow.
Oh, wow.
on my legs. Every time I think, oh, surely we've done the last surgery, something else pops up. But,
Mm.
but what I realized when I came back to school after the accident, when I decided I wanted my PhD, it was a very different experience navigating the geosciences as someone with a disability than it was as an able-bodied student. And it wasn't just the physical challenges. It wasn't just that we tended to go to really inaccessible places and really grueling schedules. It was the stigma, the idea that if you didn't fit
Mm.
this mold of a super athletic mountain climber who runs marathons on the weekends.
Right.
And if you didn't fit that mold, somehow you weren't a real geologist.
Mm.
And that part bothered me more than just about anything. This idea that, in big ways and small ways, I started seeing what I never saw in undergrad because I wasn't attuned to it, which was how we at every stage tell people with disabilities either very upfront or in subtle ways that they don't belong. And I even started thinking back to my undergrad career and some of the field trips and some of the ways that we would talk about people that couldn't keep up and that sort of thing. And I was like, oh my God, it was there the whole time. And I just didn't notice it. And so what I realized during my PhD was that, well, I felt really alone and really isolated. Then I started thinking about the fact that I couldn't be the only one. Like, surely I'm not the only person who's gone through this. And so I started looking into it, but shockingly little had been done to research the experience of people with disabilities in the geosciences or in science in general. And I realized there was a huge need for this work. I started meeting other people with disabilities who had similar challenges, and we basically decided this wasn't okay and that somebody needs to do something about it, and why not us? It put me on a whole new path. Originally, I was doing volcano science, volcano geophysics, and I moved into the path I'm on now with accessibility and inclusion and researching the experience of disability inside the geosciences. And I'm much happier on this path, so that's good.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a very interesting story and one that I feel like we've talked to other people in the academic space who are trying to work to make research itself accessible. And yeah, it's sad how little has been done until maybe just really recently. So it's unfortunately not surprising to hear, but it's great to meet people who have discovered that this is something that needs to be looked into and worked on. And you don't just research it, you put it into actual practice. So let's talk a little bit about the inaccessibility of it. So on your website, you state that your primary research area is geoscience education, specifically academic and social engagement in geoscience learning environments, and the barriers to participation for underserved groups in STEM. So how is geoscience currently largely inaccessible for students and practitioners, especially those with disabilities?
A lot of geoscience disciplines lean very heavily on experiential learning. So that's learning activities that happen outside of the classroom. And anytime you move outside of the classroom, you move into what I call the danger zone in terms of accessibility and potential exclusion. We have certain mechanisms in place. They're flawed and not great, but we have certain mechanisms in place for accommodations in the classroom. There are things that professors expect to be requested, and there's definitely varying degrees of compliance and willingness, but there's sort of a system in place. When you move outside of the classroom, you kind of move into the Wild West where a lot of bets are off in terms of willingness to accommodate. Laboratory spaces are hugely challenging. Very few lab spaces are accommodating to people with disabilities. A lot of times, students with disabilities are basically told that they're just not allowed in the lab for safety reasons, which just really grates on me. But so even just on campus and labs is a problem. But then in the geosciences, we do a lot of our experiential learning off campus entirely. We get out to go see geology where the geology is the best. And those trips are often extremely inaccessible because not only are you moving students out of that classroom setting, which they may have learned to navigate, you're moving them completely out of any of their support systems, right? Like you've moved them off campus, especially if it's an overnight trip, out of their homes, away from their support networks, out of their routine. And so it's very fraught with potential issues when you move into these experiential learning spaces. And unfortunately, rather than work with students who have disabilities or needs beyond what they're used to accommodating, most professors will just tell students they can't go. Again, they'll use the safety thing. They'll say, "Oh, well, it's just not safe to take someone with a disability in the field." Or they'll lean on, "Well, I'm sure the liability issues would be just too much." And they'll use whatever excuse they can to get out of that
At the
because
detriment of their learning.
at the detriment to their learning. And so if you're teaching your students things out in the field that you're not covering in the classroom, then those students aren't only missing out on the formative social engagement and those networks that they're building with their peers, they're also missing out on content. So they're being shortchanged across multiple areas of their schooling. And then when they go to get a job, their CV just does not look as good as everybody else's, right? So they're immediately put, in that sort of disadvantaged position because they weren't offered the same opportunities, the same networks, the same growth that the other students were offered. And so just the whole way we structure this and the whole way we handle it often puts them at a serious disadvantage their entire career. So it basically starts them from a behind position right out of the gate.
Yeah, I'm kind of like stunned and also thinking about just the parallels with other STEM degrees and other degrees that folks go to get in school and how much college and higher ed is what you learn about in the classroom, sure, but everything you also learn outside the classroom and those experiences outside the classroom that really basically determine how you're going to do once you graduate. I think people don't think about that as much, especially people without disabilities, because they can opt in, like you're saying, to do extracurricular work or internships or jobs or anything that can boost their CV, whereas people with disabilities have to weigh accessibility and what options are out there for them. And then something else that was like really resonating with me as you were talking, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of disabled hikers in the northwest. but a lot of their work is just posing the question of who is nature for, who can access nature, and kind of, I just hear similar themes of like privilege within this space of saying that, oh, well, folks with disabilities just aren't welcome here. And your work is incredibly important to be able to combat some of those stigmas and stereotypes within geosciences. So we're really excited to chat a little bit more about what you have created and some of the groups that you are involved with to combat those things. So could you tell us a little bit more now that you've laid the groundwork of what the experience for most students with disabilities unfortunately is and what you've done to create an accessible program, the GeoSPACE program, and your other involvement with the International Disability and Diversity group for folks who are interested in geosciences. Can you talk a little bit about those programs and how you used your own disability and maybe the experiences of other folks with disabilities as a framework to create that space?
Yeah, so one of the things that I am most proud of in the GeoSpace program. So the GeoSpace program is a 2-week accessible field course. We run it in Arizona in the early summer. It has multiple participation options, including fully virtual. One of the things we realized early on is we really couldn't call it an accessible field course if we didn't have a virtual option because many people just can't be gone from their homes for 2 weeks. So the Geospace came about with me and some of my disabled geo friends talking about field camp and how important it is, how formative it is for students, and how very few students with disabilities ever get that experience. And so we were thinking, what if rather than, because there'd been a lot of talk about, well, maybe we could retrofit somebody's field camp, right? Like have somebody who's really interested in working with us and we could modify their field camp to be more accessible. And then we realized that we were looking at this wrong. Because if we were going to make true systemic change, if we were really going to dismantle barriers, we wouldn't work inside a system that was built on inherently ableist principles. What we wanted to do was build our own field camp from the ground up. What if a bunch of disabled folks got together and decided how we would teach and learn in the field? If we could do it our way, how would we do it? And so we had these incredibly fun brainstorming sessions where we just start cooking up these ideas. Oh, well, I would want a drone because I can't, get very far from the road. Or I would make sure we had plenty of breaks because I get tired. And so we just started throwing all of our ideas out there. We pulled this idea together and pitched it to the National Science Foundation. And they really liked the idea and they gave us money to get this off the ground. But this GeoSpace was built by and for people with disabilities. We and one of the things that is actually challenging for some of our students to wrap their heads around, they are so used to being the only one in the group that has needs that are different than everyone else. And so they're always used to being the odd person out or the one constantly having to advocate to professors that just don't get it. And our field course is very different. There's a bunch of people with disabilities all together. And so we can build these cohorts that encourage each other and build each other up and help support each other in a way that most field situations where you're the only one out there who may be struggling, like that's not going to happen. And what really blows their minds is that when they approach us as the instructors, we get it in a way that most instructors don't get it because we are dealing with the same stuff at the same time. I tell people a lot, they focus on, the student experience and geospace and all that and how it really gives students with disabilities the opportunity to do field work. And that's true and it's awesome. But a lot of times what they miss is that we built geospace so that we could be field instructors so that we could do this work. And so it's just as important to those of us teaching the course that it's given us a way to teach field science from a disabled lens. And it's so amazing to get to do that and to show the students that there's a path for them. There's something very powerful about going out there with working professionals who also have disabilities. So they're higher up the career chain than you and thriving. And that's important for them to see as well.
I love that. I love that so much. It's exciting I love listening to disabled people get excited about their work. As a person with a variety of invisible disabilities, I resonate a lot with what you're saying, and like the need to advocate for yourself, and almost like this shock and confusion that I've felt in the past where it's, oh, this is accessible, and oh, there's other disabled people. This is awesome. I love that kind of like giddiness and joy that everybody gets to experience with the program, and just the power of creating a project or a space that's built with accessibility in mind, and like the joy that brings, I'm sure is something that y'all really get to relish in and appreciate. So we could like hone in on some of those accessibility features. I know you talked about like briefly with having it be virtual, having drones and things like that. Could you speak a little bit more about what some of the considerations are and how it's been built to be accessible for a wide variety of folks?
Yeah. So a lot, well, the beauty of starting this from the ground up is that we could build this exactly how we wanted. So that started with picking the sites and lining out the schedule. And there are a number of things that make traditional field courses inaccessible. One of them is the fact that many times you're very far away from restrooms, like a flush toilet, for a long time. And there are a lot of people with a lot of different kinds of disabilities that just doesn't work for. So after we went out and we picked the sites that we wanted to go to, we narrowed them down further based on the bathroom situation. Like, how far away are we from a flush toilet? How long can we be out here realistically before we're going to have to get back to some place that has facilities, right? Building in time to do what you need to do without rushing and building in time, break time. This is another thing that used to just wear me out trying to go on other field trips was everybody was in such a hurry. Like, go, 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 do this, go there, see that, get back in the van, drive over here, do that, jump back in. And there was like no time to rest. There was no time to process. There was no time to just breathe and take in like where you were or what you were doing. And so we are very intentional with our schedule. We build in breaks. We build in time in the schedule for things I call, like, there's lines in the schedule that say, ogle the scenery. This is just your chance to just take a minute, take it in. You know, nature is amazing. We're out here in these incredible places. I want you guys to have time to experience it however you want. So, building in time to be people in the field is one of the ways that our field course is very accessible. A lot of it has to do with how much effort we put into building a community or a culture of care. So, right off the bat, in the syllabus, in the materials they get before the course, we start lining this out. That in this field course, we are not about rugged individualism. We are not about soldiering through. You need to tell people what you need so that we can make this work for you. If you see somebody struggling, you offer to help. If you're struggling, you need to be willing to ask for help. We're trying to build a community where we support and uplift each other. This is not a competition. This is not a race. We're all going to do this together. And the whole point of the way we build these activities in the field is that you have to figure out not just what you want to do for the science we're getting done, but how you're going to make sure that everybody in your group is able to engage in what you're planning to do. Everybody has a meaningful role. Everybody's engaged. And so we build that into the way that they have to approach project management in the field is there's the science part, there's the accessibility part, and it all has to work together to get the job done. So that's a really big part of it. It's basically just the philosophy in which we run the course. And the planetary geology angle is a really fun angle, which I came upon. I started knocking this idea around when I was still a grad student. I sat in on some talk from a guy at NASA, and they were talking about like how they plan missions where people are being sent instead of just robots or whatever, and how they, especially during the Apollo era, how they planned out those missions. And I realized there was so much overlap between how NASA plans crewed missions and the philosophy that I was taking as a disabled person in the field. Because NASA comes at their science with the fundamental idea that every outcrop, every rock, everything they want to see is inaccessible. That's where they start. They know it's all inaccessible. And so they build the entire program around figuring out how to get the science done, even in the most inaccessible of places. And I was like, oh my God, this is the perfect framework because that's what we're trying to do. And so that's why GeoSPACE took on this like planetary theme. And the students eat this up. They love the planetary theme because we roll it into the accessibility theme. We'll have a set amount of time at a field site, primarily because we're all going to fatigue, including me. And if you want me to have enough energy to drive this van back home, we're going to have to leave here pretty soon. Right. So I'll say things like, all right, astronauts, you've got 2 hours of oxygen before you got to get back in the vehicle, right? They're just like, Roger. So like we just roll it in and we make it part of the theme. Our virtual students, we call them mission control. And they are our eyes in the sky and they analyze everything by satellite and remote sensing data. And they have incredible observations that we can never make on the ground. And by analyzing what we can see from space, they help us frame what we're going to do in the field. So they give us mission control briefings and then they tell us what they can see, but they also tell us what they can't see or what they can't figure out from the air. And working together with the students that are there in person, they figure out their mission for the day, their science targets, as NASA calls it. And then they figure out how they're going to accomplish those science targets for the day together. And so everybody is a big part of this team, and we build it very much like a NASA mission with mission control on the ground, working together to figure out how to get the science done.
That is so cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so clever.
I also just have been thinking about how research done by non-disabled people sometimes is just objectively bad research and
Yep.
and academic study, and it's just by and large done by non-disabled people can just miss so much. And
It's true.
just listening to you chat about the different angles of what you're observing and not able to observe, you're piecing together pieces of things that people on these other trips that you were talking about before, these inaccessible trips where you're like, oh, you're missing so much. You're missing so much data, so much to witness and experience. And I just wanted to highlight that because that goes beyond geosciences. That's just any research, any academia, and beyond academia also. But yeah, just so cool. I love that frame. But I'll
Yeah.
stop talking
You know,
so
I-
Keith can jump in.
I honestly think one of the things that anybody can do to make their event or activity more accessible is just slow it down. Like, why does everything have to happen so fast? Like, just slow it down. It would make it much more accessible.
Yeah, such a simple premise, but incredibly impactful for those that need to take an extra break here or there, or just take a few extra minutes. It's honestly, it's mind blowing. To hear how you built it from the ground up, and I had no idea about NASA's approach. I think that's just, that in of itself is fascinating. And then how you took that and built around it. It's just amazing. would imagine that the students just eat it up and
They
love it to
love
death.
it.
Just, oh, I can imagine. And I wish other projects, I just wish there was more things like that people could partake in. I think this is so fascinating. And obviously starting this within University of Florida, but I'm assuming that as the executive director of the International Association for Geoscience Diversity, which will, by the way, have links in the show notes to Anita's website, to the GeoSPACE website, and also the website for IAGD. But I'm assuming as executive director of that, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to creating access and inclusion for students, faculty, and professionals with disabilities in the geosciences, you're looking to grow this
Mhm.
globally as much as possible and spread these sort of groundbreaking ideas that started here in Florida across programs around the world.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, one of the big points of GeoSpace, beyond the fact that we just wanted to build a program that we could run and enjoy as people with disabilities, was we want people to copy us. Like, we want this idea to spread. I once had an academic kind of tut at me because I talk to people like you guys about my ideas, and I'm very open about how we built this and how we run it. And they're like, "Aren't you worried somebody's going to steal your ideas?" And I said, "I want them to. That's the entire point. I hope they do. Nothing would make me happier. Steal away." Like, that's it's funny. Again, we go back to that ableist framework and like how sometimes
Mhm.
they just don't understand. Like, that's not the point of this.
Right.
Like, it's just not the point of it. The point is that we want this idea to spread. And so we've done 2 years of the course, and now we're moving into this phase where we really are going to push into the broader dissemination. Like, how do we get these ideas to catch on and to spread to other places? And there are already two other universities that are creating field courses that are basically, as they say, modeled on geospace. So it's already starting. So what we're looking at is how do we really build that dissemination to where we can really support programs that are wanting to incorporate these ideas and bring them in. Especially, there's a lot of interest in the technology that we use, which I really haven't talked about at all, but we use some pretty slick communication technology to keep our virtual students really closely involved with what we do in the field. Live streaming, we set up our own Wi-Fi networks in the field so that students can talk across the field site to each other. And there's a lot of interest in that. And so we're looking at, can we create training programs, or how do we help get people running on this? The IAGD has a lending library full of these tech tools. So if there are programs that are very interested in doing this, but they just can't foot the bill for the tech, they can borrow ours. We have a set of our gear that's just for loaning out. So we're really trying to think about the potential barriers to implementation and how we can address those. Is it training? Is it tools? We're trying to get rid of any excuses to do better and trying to make these ideas as easily incorporated into your program as possible.
And I'm going to turn over to Maddie in a second, but I just have to comment that it the whole idea of accessibility is to broaden access.
That's right.
Why then would you not want to share it with more people and broaden access to this idea? Like, it's counter to the, and I don't know. I don't understand.
It's academia.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
academia. The whole idea that your ideas are yours and you must hold on to them and publish
Mm.
them in your papers and make sure that your name is on all of it. It's just academia, right? And again,
It's a culture.
it's a culture, and in a lot of ways, it's very challenging. Not just as a student with a disability, but coming from the indigenous lens, as a member of the Choctaw Nation, we this whole like individualism thing is just not how we roll, and it can be really challenging sometimes because my philosophy, as a disabled person, as a person with indigenous heritage, like, it just doesn't fit with my worldview, and it can be really challenging to navigate. But it's also very fun to watch the eyebrow raising among some academics who just don't get this. And, that's great too. But I will say there's a lot of interest in what we're doing. And last summer I ran a workshop on accessibility in the field. And myself and Chris Atchison, who was the original founder of the IGD, has run this workshop in years before. And we're lucky if we get like a handful of people at these workshops. And last summer when I ran it, the room was packed. Like, it was packed. People were really interested in what we were doing, and that's really great to see, and we're really hoping we can capitalize on that momentum and really get people moving from interested to actually employing these ideas in their field courses.
Yeah. I hold a similar like worldview and perspective on the work that I do and just the benefit of collective knowledge and knowledge sharing and just an anti-academic lens. And I think it's so funny to me just to hear a similar experience that you're sharing and just how the idea of sharing knowledge and not holding it and possessing knowledge is just something that everybody should take into account no matter what work they do, whether you work at an organization or you work in coalition or whatever it may be. Like, I think everybody can benefit from just detaching themselves a bit from that frame. And I wanted to reference having accessible technology. I think with COVID and how people are still rightfully uncomfortable to go back into like conference settings, people are offering both in-person and virtual abilities to participate in conferences. But like the folks that are virtual, there is sometimes, oh, like I didn't catch what you were saying because you weren't close to a mic, or the PowerPoint isn't showing up on my screen, like et cetera, et cetera. And that's just because that part of the people that are participating in the conference on the virtual side, like their experience isn't being centered. The in-person experience is now being centered. And I love
right.
to hear more. I just love to hear like what you shared and how intentional y'all were to ensure that the people that were participating virtually had a slightly different, but just as valuable time participating.
See, this is a really great question that most of the able-bodied people I talk to don't ask because they don't care about the virtual experience. So this is a great question. And it's hard. I would be
Yeah.
lying if I said this was not real hard to pull off. Part of what we do is we decided right away we needed dedicated faculty that only worked with the virtual students. Trying to split my attention and my time constantly between the two groups and keep all the logistics going and do all the field stuff, just it's not possible. Like you just can't wear that many hats at once. So we have a dedicated faculty and teaching assistant for the virtual group that works with that group exclusively. The other thing we do is we are constantly adapting based on the feedback from our virtual students. Every cohort's a little unique. Every group is dealing with a different scheduling challenge or time zone issues or caregiving responsibilities. And so we have to adapt depending on who we've got participating. But so at the start and the end of the day, everybody is together in one meeting, our virtual students and our in-person students. We start and end the day together. And then during the day, if we're in a location that has cell service, we will bring them in real time to what we're doing in the field. So they'll have real time access through like live streaming, our social media. That we use the Discord channel to keep everybody talking to each other. And that happens in real time as often as we can. And that's one of the things we did is try to minimize the number of sites where we went out of cell phone range. It can't always happen, but we try to minimize it. At the sites where we do go out of cell phone range, we will record little video snippets for them. And as soon as we get in cell phone range, we upload those. And then they can bring the discussion back over to Discord as soon as they watch and catch up. then the interaction starts back up again. But we plan for that again, just like the NASA team, because, when they're for example, the Perseverance mission on Mars, depending on where Mars is and where Earth is, they'll lose contact for hours at a stretch. So they plan that into their day. They know they've got the rover working on what it's supposed to be working on. They know what they're supposed to be working on. And then when they come back into contact, they all catch up and they all get back on the same page. And so we use the same approach with GeoSpace. There are times where our virtual students tell us, this isn't working for me, or I need this and this. And we do our best to try to adapt to that as best we can within the confines of the moving roller coaster that is a field course. But and then the other thing, this is the interesting thing, is the first year we ran the course, we actually had our in-person students were fussing about how the virtual students were getting skill sets, like exposure to skill sets that they weren't. And they felt our in-person students were feeling a little left out because our virtual students were getting to learn things like how to process satellite data and analyze a rock unit from space. And they're like, we're not getting to learn that. That's really cool. I was like, it is really cool. Right. And I said, that's the thing, is these are different experiences that work together. And we did bring in more of the remote sensing this year for our in-person cohort because they just really wanted to learn. So we build a day in. They don't get as deep into it as our virtual students, but they still get to dip their toes in it if they want and learn some of those skills. But it was very funny to me to watch the in-person students fuss about the virtual students getting to do something that they didn't get to do. And then we even do things like, so one of the important things to me that's often missing from using technology to engage students in the field like this, bringing them in with live streams and that sort of thing, is that they're still missing that authentic engagement with the landscape where they're collecting their own data, they're collecting their own observations. They're still reliant on somebody else and what they're getting fed. And there's a problem there where they're still not getting that authentic engagement. So the way we build GeoSpace is we're always thinking of ways to get our virtual students that authentic engagement with data collection, with site analysis. At the end, where we start having them take more control over the field project, our virtual students can design the flight plan for the drone. So they do the site plan, tell us where it needs to fly, what it needs to look at, and then we just execute it. We just hit go in the field, but they are authentically controlling then how they're collecting that data, right? And I think that's really important. Then we use that, we let them build like 3D models and all kinds of cool stuff with the drone data. We will have them work with a partner in the field wearing like a GoPro and doing live stream so that basically as their little, we call these little human rovers, like, all right, tell them where to go, tell them what to pick up, tell them what to send you information on. And we're constantly thinking about ways to authentically engage our virtual students in what's going on in the field.
That's awesome. That's so cool. I'm like so excited by just this conversation. I want to go.
I was just going to say the same thing. I was going to ask a wrap-up question and start by saying, other than getting someone who hasn't been in school for 25 years a way to go join this thing. And so how can listeners get more involved? How can they support your work? And it sounds like this is being spread internationally, and that's great. And how can more people get involved?
Yeah, I would love to invite folks to join on in GeoSpace. We are looking at, in our future projects, maybe building in some observer roles because there's a big interest in that. People that maybe aren't students but still want to get in on this, which I think would be great for building community. And so maybe in the future we can do that. But all of these programs are run either on grant money or on donations. So GeoSpace is currently grant funded, but all the other smaller field courses and field trips and opportunities that the IAGD offers is completely donor supported. So we offer scholarships for students with disabilities. to use them whatever they want. They don't have to use it to pay for courses because we all know it is really expensive to be a disabled person and there's a lot of extra costs. So basically, like, here's some money. Do with whatever you need to survive the semester. So we have those scholarships. We run smaller accessible field trips, which are open to everybody, usually in the fall in conjunction with one of our big conferences. But they're an amazing opportunity to build those networks and disseminate our ideas on how we run our field courses. And those are all free to participants because we fundraise. We get people that donate money so that people don't have to pay to go on these field trips with us and get these amazing experiences. And so there's all kinds of information on how you can get involved with the IHED. If you can't afford donations, we also need tons of volunteers. This work does not do itself. So volunteers, always great. Just getting the word out there about what we're doing, that's super helpful too. But yeah, we're out here, we're doing this thing. If you want to support, there's definitely ways you can do that. Oh, and tell UF you like GeoSPACE so we can keep doing it.
Spread. There you go. You all have your marching orders now, listeners. Make sure you... That's wonderful. This has just been an incredible conversation, even better than I expected. And we were really looking forward to this in the first place. So cool. Thank you so much for discussing all this with us today and sharing all this. It's fascinating. And I'm so glad to see at least portions of academia moving in this direction and hoping it continues to spread and just be accessible and available to more people.
We're getting there. It's slow progress, but I can definitely see progress. So we're getting there.
Nice. Well, thanks so much. We really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Thanks, Anita, for being on today's show. It was so fun to have you on and gush with you about accessibility and inclusion. Literally nothing gets me more amped up and giddy and excited than universal accessibility.
Oh, yeah, agreed. It's so fun to nerd out on this stuff with other people who love it too. And for those interested in learning more about Anita's work and programs, check out the show notes for links and information.
Yep, and stay tuned for our next podcast. We release new episodes every other Thursday, and those will be available on all streaming platforms. If you can, please take a moment to like, rate, subscribe, share, wherever you are. Please help us out and share the podcast. We want disability issues and intersecting topics to be better known and discussed, and this will definitely help us to do so.
Yeah, it sure will. And you can also follow us on Disability Rights Florida's social media for episode clips of this episode and others. And for more information and the episode's transcript, visit disabilityrightsflorida.org/podcast.
The You First podcast is produced by Disability Rights Florida, a not-for-profit corporation working to protect and advance the rights of Floridians with disabilities through advocacy and education. If you or a family member has a disability and feel that your rights have been violated in any way, please contact Disability Rights Florida. You can learn more about the services we provide, explore a vast array of resources on a variety of disability-related topics, and complete an online intake on our website at disabilityrightsflorida.org. You can also call us at 1-800-342-0823. Thank you for listening to You First, the Disability Rights Florida podcast.